Good morning. On this episode of the Charter School Connection podcast, I am interviewing Joseph Viterritti, author of Radical Dreamers, Race, Choice, and the Failure of the American Education System.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here today. Before we get started talking about your book, tell us a little bit about
I'm
you.
a professor of public policy at Hunter College in New York. I've spent a good bit of my career writing and doing research on education policy. I've had some experience working in three major urban school systems: New York, Boston, and San Francisco. And I've been very much involved in writing and advocating for school choice for over 30 years.
Oh, wow. And what made you interested in school choice to start with?
Well, I had been in education for some time. What happened is my dissertation advisor, Frank Macchiarola, became chancellor of schools in New York and asked me to join his staff. And from that point on, that was in the late 70s, I've been interested in education. And by the early 90s, it became clear to me that we were not making very much progress closing the learning gap that was defined by race and class. And school choice looked like one possibility of a way of addressing those issues if it were crafted in a way that was meant to do that. That got me interested in school choice.
That's awesome. It's definitely, you've been around and you've definitely seen some changes over the time. So this book specifically, when did you write this?
Well, it came out in September. I started a few years ago. I had been involved in some of the litigation around school choice, particularly one case that went to the Supreme Court. I was an expert witness, and there was another case coming through, and I was doing a podcast about it, and the person who was doing it with me asked me if my position changed over the years on school choice, because at that point I'd been writing about it a couple of decades. And he said, not really. And he said, well, how did you get to your position? And I thought about it, and I said, well, I was really influenced by a number of people I had the opportunity to work with, who, if you took them collectively, really helped define the conversation we've been having about race and class for more than 30 years. And so when I thought about that, I said, I should write about it. And the four individuals were Ron Edmonds, Scott Coons, Diane Ravitch, and Howard Fuller. And when I started writing about their work, I realized how it connected. I had dove into each one of them separately first. And then as I got into it, I felt there was more there. I felt like almost hearing two other voices. And I was. And those two voices were James Coleman in the University of Chicago, and Derek Bell, who's considered the father of critical race theory. And the fascinating thing about the book is I wanted to tell the history of American education, beginning with Brown. And I wound up doing it using those particular individuals and their contributions as a vehicle for looking at that history very much up close. And that's how I got to write the book. It took me several years, as books do. This is not my first. And as I said, the book came out in the fall.
And how many other books have you written?
This is number 12.
And are they all education related, or is it a wide
There are
genre?
two issues that I've worked on over my career. One is education policy. sure.
Mhm.
And the other is city politics with a particular focus on New York and policy. And obviously they're interconnected because I write about
Mhm.
urban school systems.
Right. That makes sense. And what have you seen, like, if you could give somebody a 1 or 2 sentence summary of the most important facts in this book, what would those be?
Well, I think let me go to the title. The title of the book is Radical Dreamers, and the subtitle is Race, Choice, and the Failure of American Education. I guess that last line is defining. And
Hmm.
if you look at our history, and only, as I said, the book is, it uses school choice as a window for looking at our history. It goes back further. And as I mentioned earlier, it starts with Brown v. Board of Education. At that point, the court said not only that segregation by the races is illegal, says that
Hmm.
when states provide education, they must provide education to all children on equal terms. You haven't done that.
Hmm.
And so when I trace the story of each of my major characters, each one
Hmm.
takes you through the scenario that begins with attempts at school desegregation, which failed, attempts at school busing, which not only failed but provoked widespread reaction in a negative way. We look at issues of funding equity, which were an attempt to resolve the differences in spending between wealthy school districts and poor school districts through litigation. We looked at community control when Black and brown parents got frustrated with all the failures that which I mentioned. Community control was the next step, and we saw dramatic examples in New York and Milwaukee, where Black parents said, well, if you're not going to educate our children, let us run our own schools. That didn't succeed either because they weren't given the kind of control they needed. And that led to choice. They said, well, maybe if we can't run our own schools, maybe we'll have access to schools that work. And that's what gave birth to the school choice movement. And as you know, that has gone down 2 paths. One is charter schools,
Mhm.
which are public schools, and the
Right.
other is private school choice, which has become very varied now, which gives
Hmm.
access, among other things, uh, to independent and religious schools with the federal government or the state picking up cost of tuition or part of it.
Hmm. And have you noticed, because we are a podcast for mainly charter school administrators, and what have you noticed the biggest, as you said, it keeps separating further. It's not really bringing everybody together. So what have you noticed specifically on the charter school side of this school choice movement, and from your
Well, first of
findings?
all, charter schools have been enormously successful when you compare them to what's going on in the nation. We've got about 8,150 charter schools in 46 states and the District of Columbia that educate about 3.8 million students as of last year. Disproportionate number of those are Black and brown, and a disproportionate of those are eligible for free lunch, which is an indicator of low-income families.
Hmm.
If you look at the research, and one probably the most significant piece of research on this was done by a group called Credo at Stanford University, which has been tracking charter schools for 25 years now. And they found that particularly, I mean, the most dramatic data, I think, is when you look at um, impoverished kids.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids gained 17 days of reading over the course of the study, a year, over 5 years. And I'm sorry, 23 days in reading and 17 days in math. That's an enormous improvement. And when you connect that to the fact that charter schools are generally, depending on the state, underfunded, yeah, the regular public schools by about 30%. That's really an amazing accomplishment.
Definitely.
And yet, most states have a limit on the number of charter schools that they're allowed to open. In New York State, for example, the wait list to get into charter schools now statewide, as of the end of last year, it's probably much higher now, is 173,000. We only have 150,500 going to charter schools. So it's an unfortunate piece of public policy. Unfortunately, Democrats particularly, and people who identify as liberal or progressive, have become some of the most vehement opposition to charter schools, not only in trying to prevent them from being enacted into law, but also in trying to prevent them from getting equal funding. There's no justification for lack of equal funding, particularly when you're educating a population that is generally more economically disadvantaged than the rest of the population. So that's what strikes me about charter schools, and it's hard to deny because the facts are there.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It seems like the facts are there for sure. If it was up to you, what changes would you see to help improve it even more?
Charter schools? No.
On charter schools,
I think there are two obvious things you can do. One is, as I just mentioned, they should have equal funding. If they're doing well, with 30% less funding, I have to believe they'll do even better with equal funding. The other thing is that you should not impose artificial limits on how many children can attend them. And I don't mean that anybody who wants to start a charter school should be able to start a charter school. Obviously, as you know, they're in 46 states now, I believe, District of Columbia. So each state law is different, and the criteria for opening a school, the criteria of maintaining a school are different among them. I think you have to maintain the standards of what a charter school should be doing in order to maintain funding. But let them blossom, let them grow, and maintain. That's one of the advantages of charter schools. They're held to a level of accountability that most other schools are not.
Right. What do you think the number one failure in regards to school choice and the failure of the American education system?
Let's look at it in terms of school choice. Let's look at it in terms of private. We just discussed charter schools. Well, let's look at private schools. Part of the problem there is it hasn't really been giving, when it started, the choice programs, particularly in Milwaukee and Cleveland, were designed to provide low-income children attending chronically failing public schools an opportunity to attend another school. And the state was going to provide tuition assistance for that. Unfortunately, they run the experiments, but the programs are underfunded. So in Milwaukee, they would give a scholarship to some of the $2,500 a year to pay tuition at a private school. But the per capita spending for children in district schools was $6,000. You saw the same thing in Milwaukee, the difference in spending to $2,200 versus $7,740.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one problem. And you know, the research on private school choice has been mixed, and I tried to cover it in the book as much as you can. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
make generalizations. I think there's some evidence that children who have participated in private choice programs tend to graduate and then college more frequently than children who are in regular public schools. What's happened over the last few years, though, is a complete change in the private school market for
Mm-hmm.
choice. And so now what you have is you have universal choice in about 16 or 17 states, so that the funding is not allocated on the basis just of income. Everybody's eligible. And that means you are providing people with funding who don't really need it in lots of cases.
Mm-hmm.
And it's questionable whether you're providing those who need it the most with adequate funding. One of the stipulations around what we call the progressive choice model was that when a school participated in a voucher or scholarship program, whatever the amount of the voucher was, they would accept as full payment of tuition. If they didn't,
Mm-hmm.
then those who were economically disadvantaged wouldn't be any benefit for them.
Right.
And so now we're all over the place with these kinds of programs. There's also what we call education savings accounts, which are another 16 or 17 states. And they're not just for tuition, but one can use them for tutoring, one can use them for micro schools, one can use them for homeschooling, one can use them to purchase various things that one could plan associated with education. Again, it's it's going to be very difficult to have any serious level of accountability in those programs because it's just too widespread. We don't even know how many micro schools we have. I just saw a rate study,
Right.
and it said that they thought there was somewhere between 750,000 and 2.1 million. That's a big range. So we don't even know how many there are. Never mind, keep them accountable. And so, I mean, one of the great ironies of the book, if you look at the district school choice, is that if, on the one hand, those who are most opposing programs that were really targeted to help disadvantaged, mostly Black and brown children, were people identified with the political left. Now, we have people identified with the political right saying that we should be spending with abandon. We're spending, in 35 states now have some form of school choice beyond charter schools. And there are questions about the level of accountability and where the money's going to come from originally. You can pile on top of that a federal program now, a tax credit program that will go in effect in 2027. And so we're kind of all over the place. And I'm concerned about the accountability issue because there is more need. We need more resources in schools that are trying to address the problems of this gap in learning And that's,
Mhm.
in my mind, is the way that we should be looking at school funding. And I don't mean it just for charter schools and private schools, but also public schools. I mean, we'd be doing
Mhm.
better funding public schools, regular public schools,
Right.
that are struggling. And so
Right.
I guess that's where I kind of come out on this in terms of public policy.
And as you've said, there's countless numbers of all different types of schools. We don't even know, honestly, how many types of schools. And every state, every county, as you said, everyone has different laws, different restrictions. In what would you, if, in a made up world, if you could like see into the future, what do you think we could do in order to help improve, like make sure everyone does get equal funding and all and everything like that? What do you think we could do differently to see all of to hold everybody accountable and
Well,
get
you have to
everybody
have
the
the will to
funding
do it.
that we need?
We know what we have to do. You just said it. We have to put more. We have to direct funding at students who need it the most. And I'm not. And as I said earlier, and I mean that has to do with whether you're doing it through private school choice, whether you do it through schools, or whether you do it through district schools. And there needs to be standards. There needs to be accountability. We're moving in a direction now with homeschooling. Well, how do we monitor homeschooling? We just said we even know how many micro schools. What? How do we deal with that? And why would that be money well spent? I mean, we're doing this while, the U.S. Department of Education is being dismantled by, the Trump administration. And so, this doesn't add up. It's not a strategy. It's an instinct that someone has. It's somewhat mean spirited, I think. That is really not saying, well, what are the issues we want to address and how are we going to address them? We know what we have to do. We have to have the will to do it. And so, people like me write books and advocate and try to make a case that we hopefully bring people around. I think that most people, parents, or people who don't even have kids in schools, I think there is a constituency for fairness. And I think we need to explain better how we achieve that. I mean, right now we have a new mayor coming in New York City, who's identified as very progressive. And it remains to be seen how he will deal with the charter school issue. It's hinted that he doesn't support raising the cap on charter schools. The Democrats in the state legislature, like Democrats all over the country, don't want to raise the cap. I'd like to see how that plays out. My feeling is that we need some leadership, and I'm fairly optimistic about him. We'll see. We have to stop looking at charter schools and regular public schools as antithetical to each other. We need to, and this was the talk early on, when you talk to people who wrote the first charter school law in Minnesota. They didn't see it as competition, and it wasn't a market issue. They saw it as a way to create opportunity and to model things. And there should be cooperation between district schools and charter schools. It shouldn't be seen as a competitive thing. Some people have defined it that way, and I don't think that's productive. I think that just creates conflict. And conflict doesn't always lead to progress. Sometimes it does. But in this case, it hasn't. They're seen as hostile camps, adversarial camps. And that's unfortunate because, when you get down to it, people work in charter schools, people work in public schools, the teachers themselves, they're there to help kids. They're not there to do battle. People don't go
Right.
into teaching to do battle. They don't go in for the
Mm-hmm.
money. There's not a lot of it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so they're dedicated. It's a vocation. And so it's amazing to me that people who are attracted to such a vocation, whether it be in a public, private, or charter school, that there's not more of a consensus about how we can do it better. So maybe I'm a wide-eyed optimist. I don't know, but you have to, you kept asking the question. I think it's an important question. How can we do better? What should we be doing? What should we be looking at? And I think that's a healthy conversation to have.
I definitely agree. Do you, besides writing your book, do you go to any legislation meetings, or what other ways do you get your word out to help start this conversation? Because I know we've heard before that the conflict between charter schools and public schools and taking away from one or the other. And like you said, we need to work together and not compete. So besides writing books like this, what other ways have you done to try to open up this conversation about just school equality and
I've
school
sat on
choice
different
overall?
panels. I mean, I've worked, I started my career working in city public schools. I worked with chancellor and worked in superintendent schools, both in Boston and San Francisco. I've met with legislators. At this point, writing tends to be my major vehicle. I just wrote an article on charter schools in New York, along the lines of what I was just saying, with the new mayor coming in. How can we look at this in a way that raises the cap on charter schools, gives them equal funding? I'll send it to you if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, that would be great.
And so I'm hoping we can have a conversation around things like that. And I think there are more people who want to have conversations.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think just finding that conversation and getting that conversation started is one of the few things we can do at the moment. So, if people want to reach out to you to start that conversation, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you? And do you want people to get a hold of
on
you?
what they want.
I guess
They can email. It's a question of what I can do to help individuals. I don't know. It's hard to say because I'm not sure what people are looking for. I'm always here to speak with the policymakers, and I do, and I will keep doing that.
Yeah, that's great. And where can people buy your book?
The usual places.
Is it on
Amazon? On Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble.
Perfect.
It's University Press is the publisher. You can order directly from them. I've been out there talking a lot about it, writing a couple of op-eds around it. We also published an excerpt, the program on education policy and governance at the Kennedy School at Harvard. Published an excerpt, which is about charter schools, really. They did a review. They did. Paul Peterson interviewed me. He's the director of the center there. So that's all posted. And we took a piece out of the book and built on it. Talked about our charter schools in endangered species. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not seen it, but that sounds really interesting. I'll have to look it up.
And it's and I was looking at some of the challenges that charter schools face. One challenge is legal, as you know. there was an attempt to create a religious charter school in Oklahoma that it was challenged in the state, and then it went to U.S. Supreme Court as whether religious charter schools should be permissible. And the court split 4-4 because Amy Coney Barrett recused herself because she meant one of the people who were involved in that particular school, which was, which she did what she should have done. But there's a possibility that a similar case will come through. And what will happen if it becomes a 5-4 decision in favor of religious charter schools? I think it would really change the character of charter schools, because charter schools are public schools by definition. So that's one risk. I also see, if you look at how the choice movement is advancing, and I've been watching this closely for many years, there is somewhat of a division of people who might have once supported charter schools, or maybe never did, really think they should put all their energy into creating choice for more along the lines of vouchers or education savings accounts, but targeted at private school market. And I think that's a potential liability. There's talk about, our criticism of charter schools for having too many regulations. I think that's the strength of charter schools. They are regulated and they are accountable. And you can close a school; it's not succeeding. So I've written about that also, and it really built. It took an excerpt. What they did is took an excerpt from the book and then built on that. So yeah, I mean, you might want to take a look at that, and I can send you actually.
Yeah, that would be great, and we will make sure to include all of that. Perfect. And then, do you have any final thoughts, hopes for the future? Anything that you would like to share?
I think we should talk to each other. We live in a very polarized country. The climate in Washington doesn't help, sure. And I think, there's an obvious disagreement over where we should go to schools. And I think we should learn to talk to people who disagree with us in more productive ways. And we haven't been doing that. We never quite did it with school choice. And we're worse now than ever. But if you're going to reach common ideas towards solutions, you have to have those kinds of conversations. First, education policy is a political issue. It's not. I mean, you can't deny it. I'm not a political scientist, so I guess I see the politics in almost everything. But the fact of the matter is politics drives policy. And politics is about people coming together and either working with each other or opposing each other. And working with each other, I think, is a lot further than each other. They're not listening.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Definitely. And we'll definitely make sure to include your book and all your articles in the show notes. And then, just to do one final fun question, if you could have a billboard posted with something about you or something that you would like everybody to know, just like a fun billboard, what would it say?
He tried to help.
That's perfect. I love that. That's great. Well, hopefully we will see some changes in the future, and your book will get people talking. And like you said, people keep talking and hopefully make some progress. Well, thank you so much for joining our podcast today. It was lovely talking to you.